Today we're going to take a look at one way of creating a recipe from scratch. As you may be able to tell, I do have a bit of a lurgy at the moment. I have tested, it's not the lager lurgy, but that probably means it's something far worse. It's probably man flu. And as we all know, if you've got an X and a Y chromosome, that shit's fatal. But in the meantime, let's jump straight into my recipe development. I've made a few notes here, as you can see. Now, these notes have come from various sources, some from brewing books that I've got. So I've grabbed some recipes from those books. I've also grabbed some recipes from some brewing magazines that I've got. I've looked online, and one source that I did use was the Treehouse YouTube site. They've published, I can't remember whether it's termed How to Brew a New England IPA or How to Brew a Hazy IPA. I took some notes from that. Now, I'm not using their recipe. I'm not using anything that really comes close to their recipe in any, sort of meaningful way. And that's because I'm not trying to recreate a Treehouse IPA. I'm trying to create a backyard brewer hazy IPA. But I have used some of the concepts and some of the recommendations that they use as well. When we look at the malts, my grist is comprised primarily of pale malt. I want a fuller-bodied, slightly sweet IPA. So I've gone for the pale malt because I think that's going to give me a fuller body that I'm looking for. The other thing that you want with your malts is something that's high in protein as well, because that's where a lot of the haze is coming from. It's coming from those proteins that are in the malts, and the way we mash them is also going to promote those proteins in the wort as well. So it's 75% pale malt. And depending on, my go-to for this is either a Voyager pale malt or a Vehement pale malt. And I'll probably use Vehement in this instance. I've also gone for 10% flaked oats. Now, I have seen recipes of 20%, even 30% flaked oats in hazies. The Treehouse recommendation was to go for 10%, and I'd probably prefer that as well. Beers that I've brewed with a lot of flaked oats in the past, to me, come out a little bit gritty and grainy, and that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's smooth and velvety. So flaked oats will give us some of that haze, but I don't want to overdo it, so that's the 10% there. I've also gone with some specialty malts, 5% Vienna, for those biscuity, doughy, bready kind of overtones. 5% wheat malt. Now, wheat malt will help to contribute to those proteins as well. It will also help with head formation, head structure, and also head retention. And 5% carafoam. And carafoam, carapils, cara, Munich, cara, whatever, they're all pretty much interchangeable. What they do is they leave behind some residual sugars. That adds a lot of body to the beer. And that's what I'm going for. I want to have something with a bit of that residual malt sweetness, but also quite a bit of those tropical hoppy flavors. And the tropical hoppy flavors without the sweetness, in my opinion, still comes through as a bitterness from the hops. So that's why I want to promote that tropical sweetness. Now I'm aiming for an OG of 1070 and an ABV of 7%. But when I get into it, I'm going to play around with the recipe so that I've got an FG of 1012 at the very least, or preferably a little bit higher than that. But I'll play around with the OG and the ABV and the final gravity, the FG, until I get those kind of numbers and the residual sweetness that I'm looking for in the beer. It'll be a single infusion mash. I'm not going to sparge off this, or if I do, it's just going to be a very light sparge to make up some volume. A lot of the recipes that I've seen call for up to 50 IBUs in the final beer. As a tip, I was in Sydney on the weekend, and I had a hazy IPA. I'm not going to mention
which one it was. It wasn't a brand that I heard a lot about before. And to my palate, there was too much bitterness in it. I was after more sweetness, more fruit. And I think it was probably coming from the fact that they had used quite a large bittering addition. So what I'm going to do is just cut that down a bit. I'm aiming for a total bittering of 35 IBUs, no more than 40, but definitely keep it down to that 35 IBUs. The boil, moving into the boil, it's going to be a 60-minute boil with a 60-minute edition and a 20-minute edition and a 10-minute edition and a 0-minute edition. So there's quite a lot of hop going in here, but of course you need a lot of hop to go into your Hazy IPA. The 60-minute edition is going to be a bittering edition. I want 20 IBUs out of that, and that's going to be coming from Magnum, because Magnum is a great hop to use as a bittering hop. The 20-minute edition, this is going to give us a lot of the flavor and the aroma without converting a lot of it to bitterness, is going to be 5 IBUs of Citra. You cannot make, in my opinion, a Hazy IPA without Citra. It's a necessary flavor component, I think. The second hop I'm using for flavor and aroma is a new one out of New Zealand called Superdelic. It's a very new hop, but it's supposed to throw those real rich tropical fruits, some stone fruit, some citrus, a little bit of berry and a little bit of floral, but none of those vegetal grassy flavors that I'm trying to completely avoid in this. It does have some piney resinous undertones to it as well, but we're obviously aiming for those tropical fruit flavors coming from it. The third hop in the schedule is Vic Secret. Now, Vic Secret has been recommended to me. It's another hop that I haven't used in the past, but it's supposed to give you those passion fruity flavors. Now, that's something I'm definitely looking to push out of this hazy, is some passion fruit. When I was at Gab's earlier in the year, I had a passion fruit sour from Dad and Dave's, and I absolutely loved it. That passion fruit flavor was just spot on, and I'm trying to reproduce that a little bit in here. Obviously, I don't want it just to be a passion fruit bomb. I want all of those tropical fruit flavors, the mango, the pineapple, the pawpaw, and all of those tropical flavors. But Vic's Secret's supposed to bring out the passion fruit and pineapple as well. So I definitely want some passion fruit in this. If I can get that, I'll be very happy. Now, they're coming in at 20 minutes with 5 IBUs each. The Citra, I'm probably going to go for a cryo citrid so that I can reduce the amount of vegetal matter that's going to be in the brew kettle. I'm also going to use it in the dry hopping, because I want to reduce the amount of hop material going in there and also reduce the amount of beer that gets absorbed by that hop material. Remember, every time you add hops into your fermenter as a dry hop, you're losing a little bit of beer because that dry hop pellet absorbs beer. At 10 minutes, I'm going to throw in some yeast nutrient, and at 0 minutes, I'm going to use the same weight as I use at the 20-minute edition for each of those hops, but obviously it's not going to impart the bitterness, the IBUs, that it did at the 20-minute mark. I'm going to Whirlpool for 5 minutes, and then a 5-minute sanitization on the plate chiller, just to make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to infect the beer. Once that's done, it's going into the fermenter. I'm using London Ale 3 yeast. That's the Y Yeast 1318 strain. I'm going to create a starter, and I'm going to use a tip that one of the channel commenters put up on the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale video, which was that he cold crashes his yeast starters before he pitches the yeast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 3-litre starter with DME, dry malt extract. I'm going to pitch a couple of packets of London Ale 3 yeast in there, and this will be the day before I brew. I'm going to let that go crazy all day. At the start of the brew day, I'm going to cold crash that to separate the yeast from the liquid. Pour as much of the liquid off as I can, but leave a little bit of the liquid in there just to make a slurry with the yeast and make it easier to pour. And that way I'm not adding a lot of DME liquid into my wort and muting those hops a little bit. And the suggestion in the comment was that maybe it was the size of the starter that muted those hops a little bit. I think it was possibly a bit of that, but also possibly a bit of the pressure fermentation as well. Speaking of which, I am not pressure fermenting this during primary fermentation. I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to let the yeast do what the yeast wants to do. But when I dry hop, I am going to pressure ferment so that we don't lose any of those aromatics out to the atmosphere. They all stay in the kettle. So coming back to that, I know I'm jumping all over the place a little bit here. The yeast, I'm going to pitch at 18, ferment at 20. Once the wort's in the fermenter, I'm going to drop the temperature down to 18, pitch the yeast, and then allow it to come up to 20. I'm not going to let it get above 20 because I don't want any of those. So London Ale 3 yeast can throw overripe fruit flavors when you allow it to creep up above 20. So up around 23, which is the top of its tolerance, it will start throwing some of those overripe fruit flavors. And that's not what I want. I don't want overripe peach and overripe pear. I want those nice, crisp, clean tropical flavors. Going back to our fermentation, on day 7, I'm going to dump the yeast because I'm going to save the yeast, I'm going to wash the yeast, and I'm going to put it into splints, and I'm going to dry hop. So I'm going to do another soft crash down to 16 Celsius, and I'm going to dry hop. The recommendation is anywhere from 15 to 30 grams per litre. I'm going to do 15 grams per litre. I'm not going to go overboard with the yeast at this stage. As I said, this is a trial batch. I'm going to try 15 grams per litre, see how that turns out. Now that's 5 grams per litre of each Citra, Superdelic and Vic Secret per litre. If it's a 60 litre batch, 6 5s are 30, 300 grams of each. Now that's a lot of hop. That's a hell of a lot of hop. That's 900 grams of hops. But I'm going to use cryo hops for the Citra to cut that down a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't get my hands on cryo Superdelic or Vic Secret, so I'm just going to have to use the normal hop there. Dry hop for a couple of days. I'm going to turn the spunding valve up to 15 psi. That's going to retard re-fermentation from hop creep. It's going to prevent the production of DA, diacetyl or diacetyl, depending on which way you prefer to say it. And it's going to partially carbonate. And most importantly, as I said before, it's going to prevent those hop oils, those essential oils, from evaporating or through that fermentation process, escaping out through the airlock and into the atmosphere. It's going to keep it in the beer. On day 12, I'm going to dump the hops so we don't get any hop burn and we don't start getting those grassy and vegetal flavors in the beer. And I'm going to cold crash it down to 1 Celsius. I'm going to let it sit at 1 Celsius for probably 2 days just to get all of the sediment, that hop sediment out of suspension, any yeast out of suspension. And then it's going into the kegs for its final carbonation. Now, I haven't spoken yet about the water profile. You can see on the screen what I'm going for. That 2-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio is going to make those hops sing. I'm starting from a base of almost RO water. There's very little mineral in our tap water here because we're on tank. And we have a carbon filter system that filters all of the water that comes into the house. It is pure water. So that's the water profile that I'm going for. Now, we're going to be switching backwards and forwards with Brewfather just while I sort this out. Let's have a look at Brewfather. So the first thing I want to do is create a new recipe, and I'm going to call it Hazy IPA. I haven't come up with a creative name for it yet. I'll do that down the track. No image of it. So fermentables, we're going to add pale ale, the vehement pale malt. It says I've got 0.07 kilograms. I don't quite believe that. I don't always keep my stock levels up to date in Brewfather, unfortunately. It's something that I need to get onto. I'm going to throw just 1 kilo of each of these malts in. Then I'm going to go into the percentages and change the percentages around to what I want. And then once that's done, I'm going to set my OG to 1070. And that way I don't need to play around with values and amounts and everything like that. So let's do it. Let's go for flaked oats. Beds is what I get from Hoppy Days. Throw a kilo of that in. Now I want a kilo of wheat malt pale, yep. A kilo of Vienna. Again, I'll use the Weiman because I've used it before and I quite like it. And a kilo, what was the last one? Cara. Cara Pils, Cara Foam. There we go. Again, it's Weiman, so, and I have used it before. As I said before, I've got all my malts in. Now I set the percentages. Cara Pils, 5%. Flaked maize. I made a mistake on that one, didn't I? It wasn't flaked maize, it was flaked oats. Gladfield, I've used, no, that's the Big O. I don't want Big O. Yeah, Breeze. I'm pretty sure it's Breeze that Hoppy Days gets. So I'll change that over to there. So now I go into my percentages again. So Cara Foam, 5%. Flaked oats, 10%. Pale malt, 75%. Vienna malt, 5%. And wheat malt, 5%. So we're going to set that. And they're all nice looking numbers. And that gives me, that's what I didn't do. I didn't set my batch volume. So up here, this Brewzilla profile, it's a 100 litre Brewzilla. Obviously, your batch volume is going to vary from recipe to recipe. I can get, I can't get 100 litres out of it because you boil off. But I can get around 90 litres out of it depending on the boil time. So when I've created this equipment profile, I've set it to 85. Now what I want to do is go in here and change it. I'm only making a 60 litre batch and I will save that. So the batch volume is 60 litres. Now my OG, I'm going to go for a 1070. And then I want to scale the recipe so that it meets that 1070. And now if we go up to this little box on the right hand side here, we haven't put a style in yet. So I want IPA styles. So I type in IPA. And it's even got Hazy or New England IPA. So we select that style. And you'll see that 7.1% is right in the wheelhouse. So I said 7%, 7.1%. I'm not going to quibble over that. The reason being is that 7.1% is dependent on how accurately I can measure my wort in the pre-boil gravity, the post-boil gravity, and the final gravity. That 1070 at 7.1% is pretty close to what I was after. The reason you go for that 7.1% isn't just to make it super alcoholic. The reason you go for that 7.1% is because the alcohol actually gives the beer a little bit of sweetness. The carbonation that you add to it gives the beer a little bit of sweetness as well. And the residual sugar, at this stage it's saying 1016, also gives the beer a little bit of sweetness. So that's going to add to the body of the beer. If you let that 1016 drop too much, it's going to come out as watery and flabby. And that's not what we want. So at the moment, we're a little high on the final gravity. I find that most of my beers finish drier with the yeast that I'm using than Brewfather calculates. So I'm not worried about being 1 point over the final gravity for the style. EBC of 11, which is quite nice. That should give us a nice golden, almost fluoro yellow colour. Now we get onto our hop schedule. So we're going to add Magnum. Now the alpha acid percentage is set here to what's probably an average for Magnum hops. You probably find that they vary between, let's say, 9% and 15%. When I buy my hops, I'm going to have to take a look at the alpha acid percentage, compare it to what's here, and then just adjust the amount either up or down to get the amount of IBUs that I'm looking for. So the IBUs are what's important. not the amount. So let's say I'm going to add 50 grams. That gives me 21.6 IBUs. Okay, that's pretty close. Let's go for 48. 20.7. 47. 20.3. 19.9. 46.5. Look, I'm not going to get any fussier than that. 46.5 gives me 20.1 IBUs. I'm after 20. That's at 60 minutes in the boil. That's a pellet hop. It's got all the information in there that you need so that Brewfather can calculate the IBUs for you. Now that's getting us close to our IBU range, but it's not in range, is it? The range for this style of beer is 25 to 60. So now we need to add our 20-minute additions. So we're going for Citra, and it's going in at 20 minutes in the boil. We're going to add, let's say, 30 grams. That's a little high. So now let's go back to 20 grams. That's close. 5.2 IBUs. Let's go back to 19. 5 IBUs. Perfect. Again, when I get my Citra hops, I'm going to have to check the alpha acid percentage and adjust the amount based on the percentage of the hops that I'm using, as opposed to this theoretical alpha acid here, because that will affect my bitterness. Now I add in my Superdelic. Superdelic, here we are, New Zealand. It's a lower alpha acid percentage, so let's start at 30. Oh, why did I go 30? 20, 18. Oh, you know what I've done? I haven't adjusted this for 20 minutes into the boil. So let's go up 4, 4.2, 4.4, 5.1. Again, I'm not going to quibble over a 0.1. 20 minutes into the boil, 24 grams of Superdelic. Now the third hop that we're using is Vic Secret. It's a 15.5%. Let's adjust our time this time. So it's got more alpha acids in it than the Citra. So let's start with 15 grams. 5.1. There we go. Again, not exact, but this is home brewing. We don't get exact. We get pretty damn close, and we get pretty damn good. Now what I'm going to do is add those amounts again at 0 minutes. Now the final hop addition is our dry hop. So let's start with the Citra again, and we're going with dry hop at 7 days. Instead of adding an amount in grams here, we're going to add an amount per litre. So we're going to add 5 grams per litre. So that's 300 grams. As I said, I'm probably going to use Cryo Citra, which means only 150 grams. Okay, again, I'm going to add Superdelic at dry hop at 7 days and 5 grams per litre. And Vic Secret, dry hop, 7 days, 5 grams per litre. So now we go up and we look at our stats. Everything is looking perfect. We're at 35 IBUs. Our BU-GU ratio is 0.5. That's going to give us a nicely balanced beer. Our FG is a little over, but as I say, I tend to find that beers finish off just a little bit drier. Now the next thing to look at is our temperature. So we're going to edit the mash profile. We actually want that at 67, and that's going to leave a little bit of body in the beer. We're going to mash out for 10 minutes at 75, and we just save that. That's telling us to take a strike temperature of 71.3. I'm probably going to do it 68 or 69, because what I find is that when I add the grain, even though it is how much? It's 17 kilos of grain, it's not going to drop the temperature that much. I find that I get a 2, maybe 3 degree drop in temperature. Now, I don't mind if it drops a little bit below 67, but what I don't want to have happen is to mash in at 71 and have it sit there at 70 or even 69 for 10, 15, 20 minutes while that mash temperature tries to drop. I'd rather bring it up, and the brew house that I've got will heat quickly. Then I'd rather do that than try and drop the temperature. Looky, our pH is out, and we haven't added any salts yet. So let's go into our calculator. It's taking all of this into account, the amount of water. That's what I haven't done yet. I haven't told it that it's a single infusion. So we are not sparging. And the way we do that is we come up to our equipment profile. So you come down to where it's got the mash sparge water, where it says mash and sparge water calculation method. We're going to set that to no sparge. And we'll save that. Let's see if that's going to give us a complaint. Yeah. So the water amounts have been adjusted not to exceed mash volume by 0.8 of a litre. What that's telling us is if we put all of the water and then all of the grain in there, we're going to have an overflow of about 0.8 of a litre. Now what that means is I will go for a slightly lower mash water amount, and then when it comes time to boil, I'm just going to top up so that I've got a pre-boil volume of 70.5 litres. Now as for the rest of our water calculations, we've got a pH of 5.8, which is quite high. We want to drop that down a little bit, but first we're going to have to calculate what salts we need to put in there. Now, I don't know why I haven't changed this yet. My default should actually be reverse osmosis water. I need to change that in my settings. And then our target profile, if we take a look here, Hoppy Nipa, that's probably going to be the closest profile that we'll get to. And if we take a look at these numbers compared to what I put, they've got chloride of 186 and sulfate of 93. So you got that 2-to-1 ratio. Save that. Style, let's go with the American IPA. Chloride to sulfate needs to be different. I need more chloride than sulfate. Yeah, I think we're going to have to just play with this ourselves. Now, the addition of those salts has brought the mash down to 5.72, but that's still too high. So what we're going to do is auto-calculate our salts. And if we take a look back here on the screen, you can see that it's giving us a chloride of 152 and a sulfate of 93. They're still quite low, so we need to boost them up a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with the calcium chloride. Now, calcium's already at 100. Yeah, and I can take it up to 130. So let's add a little calcium chloride in. It gives us a calcium level of 130 parts per million, chloride of 206. So chloride we're looking for 240 and sulfate 120. So the other area where we can boost our chlorides is with canning salt, also known as table salt, which is sodium chloride. So if we bring our chlorides up to 230, that brings our sodium up to 32. Sodium can be up to 40 and chloride up to 240. So we've still got a little bit to go. Let's add a little bit more canning salt. There we are, 39 and 240. That's pretty damn close. And now our sulfates, which we get through magnesium sulfate, can come up to 120. Now magnesium we've got at 10 at the moment. That should be at 10, so we don't want it to come up too much higher, but we need to boost those sulfates a little. Let's leave it at 110. We might drop the chloride down a little just to match. Bring it down 10 here and bring it down 10 here. So what we've got now is calcium of 125. We're aiming for 130, so that's good. Magnesium of 14, we're aiming for 10, so we're a little over on that. Sodium 32, where we were going for 40, and then we've got our 2-to-1 ratio on chloride to sulfate. That gives us a pretty damn good water profile for what we're after. One of the things that Treehouse do say in their recipe is that your salt is your secret sauce. That's going to vary from area to area. The salts that I'm adding here are not the salts you should be adding to your batch. Go in, grab your city's water report to find out what's in the water to begin with. And then from there, you can start to build up your water profile and figure out exactly how much of each of these salts you need to add to reach the profile for the beer that you're aiming for. Now remember too that this is a no sparge, and we're just adding salts into the mash, and then we're adding a little bit of water in at the end, which is going to dilute it just a little bit. So even though we start with magnesium, for example, of 15 parts per million, when we add water at the end to top up our volume, we're getting 14 parts per million. And if we take a look up the top here, the addition of those salts has dropped our water pH to 5.4. Now we save the adjustments to the recipe. And what that does is it adds those salts into the miscellaneous bucket here. There's one more thing we want to add, and that is yeast nutrient. I'm going to add 3 teaspoons. And what that's going to do is give the yeast a little bit more nutrient to kick off with, and to start that fermentation off really healthily, so that we don't get any of those phenolics that we want to avoid at all costs. Yeast. Now this is where it's going to get interesting. Not that it hasn't been interesting up until now. We're going for London Ale. So we can go with the Y Yeast or Yeast Labs. Y Yeast is pretty easy to get. And I'm going to start with 2 packs. Now we can calculate a starter. With this yeast starter, we're starting with 2 packs. We're using a stir plate. We want to calculate the starter size. It's saying we need a 6.2 litre starter. Oh my God, that's huge. I'm not going to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 3 litre starter. And as it's going, I'm going to add a little more DME. So I'm going to end up with a fairly big yeast colony in this 3 litre starter. I don't have a 6 litre conical flask that I can use to start, and I don't want to either. I don't want to be adding in a lot of liquid into my wort. Then once the starter's done, once it's finished building, I'm going to throw that and cold crash it. I'm going to tip off as much of the liquid as I can, but leave a little bit behind so that I can create a slurry. And then that slurry will go into the wort rather than tipping all of that liquid into the wort. Our fermentation profile, we're going to ferment in primary for 14 days. Nope. We're going to ferment in primary for 7 days at 20 Celsius. Then we're going to, so step 1, we'll call that primary. Then we're going to add a step, and we're going to drop the temp to 16 for 5 days. And then we're going to crash to 1 for 2 days. And then we're going to package. So what Brewfather is doing here is gathering all of the information that it needs, so that when you go to run this batch, it's got every step figured out for you, and it can guide you through the whole process. And that's it. That's all the information that we need to create this batch.
So that's all there is to it. I strongly recommend that you get yourself some books, or go to a library, or join a brew club where they have a library, and borrow books. Read them. Read the recipes that you're interested in making. If you want to make hazy IPAs, then go for books that have hazy IPAs in them. If you're interested in English recipes, ESBs and real ales and things like that, then go and grab some of those books. Subscribe to a magazine, even if it's an online magazine, because there are a lot of really great articles. The magazine that I subscribe to this month has a great article on gluten-free beers, so that's something that's going into the pipeline for development soon. A lot of breweries now are putting recipes online. They may not be their commercial recipes, although as if you look up there, the Sierra Nevada guys actually did put their Sierra Nevada Pale Ale recipe online. But breweries like Treehouse, they've put just a generic hazy IPA recipe online. And I've used that and some of the concepts that they were talking about and some of their ideas in development of this recipe. Talk to people at brew clubs, find out how they go about their recipe development, find out what their favourite recipes are, see if they're willing to share some of their recipes with you just to give you a bit of a head start. But take a recipe, don't just copy it, make it your own. Swap it around a little bit. If you like certain hop flavours in your beers, then go for those hops. If you like beers that throw some of those banana and clove and spicy phenolics, then experiment with yeast that throw those flavours. Whatever you do, experiment, because that's what home brewing is all about. Home brewing isn't all about just taking a recipe and copying it. Home brewing is all about making the recipe your own and doing something exciting with it. That's it for this week's episode. Remember to click on the like button and subscribe and click on the notification bell so that you find out when we've got new episodes coming out. It really does help us when you click the like button and throw some comments in. Google looks at that and says, this is great content, I'm going to promote that. So it really does help the channel out. If you do nothing else, just do those few things for us. Anyway, I don't have a beer, but cheers anyway.